Ciao Ren, sei l'unico per ora. Mi senti? Ok, sì, mi senti. Va bene, aspettiamo, ok. Boh, ok, perfetto. Hi everyone. I'll wait a few minutes uh, to start so that more people maybe will join. Ciao Fra. Ciao Andrea. Okay, maybe while we wait for others to connect, I will maybe start to introduce myself. There is no much to say, so just to kill the time. Uh, so my name is Rebecca Ravalli. Many of you know me already. Among those connected, I'm a PhD researcher at the European University Institute in Fiesole, very close to Florence, and I do economic law. So I deal with economic issues and the legal order of these economic activities. And in particular, I try to deal with the issue of sustainable production, not only in the garment sector, but this definitely falls in my area of interest. At the European University Institute, I'm proudly part of the group of the engaged academics, which is the group that has launched this initiative called Non Usciamo to try to engage with civil society via Instagram. But what we usually do is basically try to connect academia with the civil society, and we organize social and cultural events in, well, public spaces, mainly in Florence, because we are based only at the UI, but we hope that maybe in the future there will be other engaged academics in other universities. So it's a kind of model that we hope will be replicated in many other academic centers. And as I was saying, like, of course, this quarantine time has forced us to stay home. So we are trying to engage through other means. And in particular, we have opened this Instagram account that is a little bit, I would say, virgin still. And we have launched this initiative called Non Usciamo to reach you guys in your home. And today I'm going to talk about sustainable production in the field of the garment industry. And actually, I wasn't supposed to present today, but since this week is the Fashion Revolution week, I decided that it was the right moment to share with you the knowledge that I have acquired during these years of PhD. What is the Fashion Revolution Week? So the Fashion Revolution Week is an initiative taken by civil society that try to create awareness in consumers about the sustainability of their products and especially about the conditions of workers and employees in the garment industry. And this initiative was launched 6 years ago to recall the victims of the Rana Plaza accident. So in 2013, so 7 years ago, the Rana Plaza, which was a factory, a garment factory, producing and supplying Garment are like clothes, piece of clothing, to Western companies. Well, the factory collapsed on the 24th of April in 2013. And that day, that moment, was particularly significant among civil society, but also regulators, enterprises, and states, and consumers as well. Was a particular moment because the number of people who died and who got injured was very high, because 1,100 people, that's the official account, so probably even more people died in the collapse of the building, and more than 2,000 people were injured. So you understand that it's a really high number of people that lost their lives, and all of these to produce at a very cheap cost, very low cost, some piece of garments to be sold in Western markets. So there is, I would say, an ethical and a moral conflict that has emerged. But it was not only that made the Rana Plaza accident so significant. Obviously, the number of people was really astonishing, but there were also other factors that make this case of the Rana Plaza really a good case study to analyze why we still have to witness this type of accident, because the Rana Plaza has not been the first accident, and unfortunately has not been the last one. We still see and read about accidents, fires exploding in factories abroad, or I don't know, I recently read an article on The Guardian about children being exploited in coffee growing fields. So you see that it's very ubiquitous and it's still present. So today I would like to try to explain to you, because I think it's really fair and natural to ask how the hell does this happen? No, why the law doesn't do nothing? Does the law do something about this problem? And if it does, why we still don't get a proper answer and a proper remedy against these violations, which often include violations of human rights, workers' well-being, and workers' rights, but also in production, we experience a lot of environmental damages. So why doesn't the law provide an effective remedy against these damages, which are often called externalities of production? No? So just to use a technical word, but they're really damage to people and the environment. Well, the answer is, as always, a bit complex, no? Because if it was easy, we wouldn't have nothing to talk about, no? So the problem relates two branches of law. One is trade law, and the other one is contract law. And this depends on a transformation of the way of producing that we have experienced starting from the last decades of the 20th century, so around the 1990s, where the way of producing, of making products completely changed. And to explain this transformation, I will use an example like that, so that it comes clear to you, no? We tend to ask, and also we see on our products labels saying where the product is made. Even the promoters of the Fashion Revolution Week ask, who made my clothes? And this word make is exactly what has changed over the past century. And I will take the example of Levi's, the jeans maker. You may be, you know the brand, and maybe you even own a pair of their jeans. Levi's is a quite old company for the garment sector, because it was founded at the end of the 19th century, around I would say around 1850s, where Levi's produced this piece of clothing called blue jeans, and in 1873 he even patented the blue jeans. So it's really a very old piece of garment. And obviously at the beginning, Levi's was an entrepreneur, and when he started to have success in selling his product, he founded his own company, and was producing the jeans mainly in one factory. No, so the jeans was produced in one single factory, and then when it turned out that the jeans was so successful, Levi's started to open new factories, mainly in one century. It owned, I think, between 20-30 factories, mainly in the United States, in Mexico, and in Europe. So let's say that over a century it expanded its production, but Levi's was still an owner of its own factories, and the jeans were made in one single place, in one premise. This thing doesn't happen anymore. Not at all, but it's much more rare to have a production clustered in one factory rather than having it spread and fragmented over a supply chain. Now we read maybe on the newspapers like global value chains, global supply chains. What does this mean? It means that the production doesn't happen in one factory anymore, but it's spread, it's fragmented in many different factories. This is not only that fragmentation, but is reflected on the fact that the production is also outsourced. So Levi's still produces its own pair of jeans, but it doesn't own any factory anymore. Rather, if you go on the website of Levi's, you will see that it has a very long list of subcontractors that are based in more than 50 countries. They're based mainly in China, but there are several also in Italy, in Argentina, not only necessarily in Asia and Southern Asia. So this represents really a shift in the way that we produce. And when you think that Levi's doesn't own the factory anymore, but the jeans it makes is still the same, you start questioning, how does Levi's ensure that the jeans meet the quality that Levi's wants, no? Because you go in a shop and the Levi's 501 is still the same. From decades and decades, it is still the same, but Levi's doesn't own its own production anymore. It buys from subcontractors. And here is the main difference with the former way of producing in the single firm compared to global value chains. Because global value chains are, from the legal perspective, chains of contracts. So all the production is put together, held together through chains of contracts, on which Levi's has a strong contractual power. So this means that Levi's can determine the main clauses and terms of the contractual relation with the subcontractors. And this is a very, very important thing to understand why the Rana Plaza accident happened and why it was so difficult for the victims to obtain compensation. And it still is in this type of circumstances. In fact, a contract, it presumes that it happens between equal parties, no? So Levis goes to a subcontractor and says, okay, can you produce this amount of products and these products in this way for this money? And the subcontractors is thought to be free to choose, no, whether to enter the contract or not, or to define the standard of the contract. And well, after the contract is signed and is entered, if a party doesn't comply with the agreement, the other party has the faculty of terminate the contract. And this is exactly the problem of global value chains, because lead firms, this is how they are called, no? Levis is the lead firm of its own global value chains, because it controls the production and it manages to impose its own terms in the contractual chain. Well, it's very easy that the other company doesn't have the same contractual power, and it's very easy that if the other party placed in a maybe less developed countries needs the contract with Levis to, well, just to live, to have an income, no? So let's say that lead firms impose their own terms, and if the Rana Plaza in this case, no, doesn't comply with the terms, the leading firms can terminate the contract. And this obviously creates a shield against the possibility to hold the company, Levis, no, in our example, to hold Levis accountable if it commits like violations of workers' rights, like, or better, if workers' rights are violated in its own chain, in Levis' chain. Because formally, Levis is not responsible for the workers of the Rana Plaza. Just to disclaim, Levis didn't have nothing to do with the Rana Plaza, but I'm just taking these two examples to explain what a value chain is and what is the supplier at the end of the chain, no? So a leading firm doesn't have any obligation towards the workers of the company that represent the subcontractor, because for the contractual relation, Levis has nothing to do with the Rana Plaza employees, with the subcontractor employees. And this really protects the company. After the Rana Plaza, there were really a lot of demonstrations from civil society, but I would say also really in the academic field, in the professional field, it was really it did really have a huge impact. So today we see that companies tend maybe to try to be more responsible in their production, but it's really often just a facade, because then a contract is in place. So when accidents like the Rana Plaza happen, what Levis can always do and will always do is to say, well, I put my terms in the contract, they didn't comply with the contract, so I terminate the contract. And this is really the issue, no? They have a lot of power and they can just then move to another subcontractor, and they don't care about the people and don't care about the fact that especially in less developed countries, the only source of income in those countries is the exports. So they don't have natural resources, they are not developed economies, so they can only rely on the fact that big companies go there and buy, and so that they can export and make revenues in their own country. That's the other side of the coin. So that being said, which is, it's a problem, no? I hope you got the problem. So production is fragmented, and each fragment is a contract. on the one hand, there is levies, on the other, there is the subcontractor with less contractual power. And if the subcontractor doesn't meet the requirements imposed by levies terminate the contract and goes to another subcontractor because it has a lot of leverage. So, and it doesn't have any responsibilities toward the workers or the environment around the factories that supply the products to levies. So in front of this situation, I think that a legitimate question would be, well, then why the hell don't we ban these products? No, why do these products that are, I would say, maybe immorally produced, why do they still circulate in our markets? And I mean, they represent the major part of our markets. Well, here comes the problem with trade law. For those who don't know what trade law is the law that regulates commercial relations among countries, and it's mainly governed by the WTO. And the WTO sets one strong principle, the principle of non-discrimination. So basically, well, this will sound weird for those who don't know, because Trump is doing everything but respecting trade law. But in theory, trade law asks countries not to impose particular favorable conditions to trade with a certain countries instead of the other. So it really implements the principle of non-discrimination and free trade. Free trade implies that we cannot have barriers to trade. And among the barriers to trade, like they can be really of various kind. You can have quotas, you can have restrictions, you can have customs. And among these barriers to trade, there are technical barriers to trade. It means that technical barriers to trade look exactly at the qualities of the products. So, for example, just for the sake of understanding, Brazil cannot say, okay, I will stop importing organic cotton t-shirts. Just like that. I will ban organic product t-shirt. This cannot be done because there is no, it's seen as a discriminatory policy. So for trade law, all products should be circulated as long as they are safe, obviously. Nonetheless, there are exceptions to this. It's not so rigid and so strict. But you can understand that it's really difficult to justify a ban on products just because somewhere there a factory doesn't respect workers' rights. You can definitely understand that state cannot really implement such a policy. It's really difficult to justify this type of bans. There are good examples also. For example, in the EU, we have a ban on conflict minerals. So we ban all those products that contain minerals that come from areas of conflict. I think that most of you maybe will have watched already Blood Diamond. Those are the type of conflict minerals that in Europe are completely banned. But also, for example, in Europe, products containing seal products, the animal, are completely banned. So there are a few examples where the EU was able to ban products on the basis of ethical consideration regarding the process of production, but those are exceptions. Under trade law, these must be exceptions. So we cannot have a general law saying we ban all products where, I don't know, there was child labor or whatever, no? So if we combine the two pictures, no, the lead firms that have a lot of power but no responsibility, and they have no responsibility because they transfer the responsibility to the subcontractor by means of contract. And on the other hand, we have trade law, where like Western economies cannot ban those really badly produced products. What can we do? It is clear that actually this happens all, I have to say it, but it really happens all in the field of law. It's all legal formally. It's substantively questionable whether this is a fair way of doing trade and making products available. So I don't know how long I spoke, but this is more or less the issue. So why we were not able to impede an accident like the Rana Plaza, and we still cannot because nothing serious has been done. Of course, after the Rana Plaza, there were some measures, but they are mainly regarding like the Bangladesh situation, and also they are not very effective, in my opinion. So for the future is really challenging. I would say that now with this coronavirus moment, it's even more unclear what will happen to global value chains. What we know is that, as always, the most vulnerable parties are those who will suffer the most. It has been foreseen humanitarian crisis in places like Bangladesh and Indonesia. Exactly because of what I was saying before. So a leading firms can always terminate a contract. So now that we are not consuming, the companies are just terminating or suspending the payment and the contract with the subcontractors, and therefore the people, the workers there are really facing a gigantic crisis, no? And of course this make us as a consumers in a very weird position, because on the one hand we know that their income depend on our consumption basically, but at the same time also the violation of their rights and their well-being depend on our consumption. So it's really a hard position that, in my opinion, require structural change. So this is why I really support initiative like the Fashion Revolution Week, because I think they really push toward this structural change. But I would say that it's really a long way to go before we really can exit from consumerism, because this is still the era that we live in. So I hope that gradually we will move out from this this kind of paradox, let's say. I have a question, but it is always possible for multinationals to check the quality and compliance of their whole production. Is this realistic? Ciao Giulia. So the system of checking the quality is another part that makes all this thing very complicated, because so they check the quality. The quality check is quite constant on the chain, because usually what happens is that you have fragmentized production, and then you have these the final products are traded, and because they have to respect, for example, certain requirements of safety, they are also checked before being circulated, for example, in the EU market, no? Because each economy has its own safety standards. So that needs to be checked, as well as quality. So you have a phase where the product features are checked, whereas the production features are checked through, hi Eleni, through auditing. So how this function, no? Because, for example, if you go on the website of Levis, you'll see that they are really, really pioneering their corporate social responsibility policies. No, they are implementing the terms of engagement. They grow on biological cotton. They have developed a trademark on producing the jeans using less water. So they are really trying to make an effort towards make their production more sustainable. This is how it's called, like sustainable production. Doesn't regard only the environment, but also the human and social aspect. And how Levis makes sure that these sustainability standards are respected is by a system of auditing. So regularly, at least once a year, I think there is a check. So they send auditors to check that production is done in compliance with the standards imposed by Levis. And here we find the other enormous issue of this system. And another, once again, the Rana Plaza offers a good example of this, because one of the problems of the Rana Plaza was that the auditors were doing the check of the safety of the buildings 1 week before the collapse. And there were really like hole and, how do you say, like creaks in the wall, very big. But for some reason, the owners of the factory managed to hide it. So the outcome of the auditing said that the building was in compliance with the requirements, and that the production was in compliance with the requirements, but it actually was not. So the problem of the system of auditing is that they are constantly cheated. Constantly, it's really like a practice that they manage to hide, because they prepare. They know when the auditor is coming, so they get prepared first. And second, you can understand that there is a language barrier. So it's really, usually auditors are from the place, the country. And so the conflict of interest is really, really, really high. In fact, also one of the problems is really the transparency of this auditing system. Because of the high conflict of interest, they are really biased. So this is a deeper insight on the problems. Thank you for the question. Are there any other question? Is there something that wasn't clear? Because it's a bit, I think it sounds a bit technical with all this thing like contract and blah blah. Okay, go ahead, Mario. I hope you didn't fall asleep, everyone. Yeah, anyway, Mario types, I was also saying that it's quite ubiquitous. So today, and also actually in my research, I focus on the textile garment, because on the textile industry, because I mean, it's a good example. But the fact is that it concerns all sectors of production. So thank you for the question, Julia. So it really regards all sectors of production. So that's why when I meet those people who do a little bit of moralism, no? Like, oh yes, I wear secondhand and I'm cool and I don't buy. And I really appreciate that, because I mean, we have to start from somewhere, and definitely the garment sector is easier to start because you can easily buy secondhand. But at the same time, I would say, like, you are not superior, because unfortunately, probably the other 90% of things that you it's probably done and produced in a not fair way. So it will take time. Let's read Mario's question. As for climate change, this is a problem which depends on globalization, and in this field, we see a major roles played by states through international agreements. Is this happening the same for consumer protection? If not, should it be? What do you mean for consumer protection? So, yeah, obviously, no, I mean, I made it very simple, let's say the position of the state, but it's plenty of international agreements, not even agreements, but documents, because they are not binding, because you cannot, as I was saying, like trade law impose you not to have like a ban or a restriction. So you cannot have an international document that is binding. And an international document, then it's binding for the states, no? So even if it was binding, it would address the state. Whereas companies are private, no? So like setting top-down standards decided by states which cooperate. So there are some documents like there are the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which kind of set the framework for this field. But they are not binding. There are also the OECD guidelines. The OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises that also deal with the problem of exploitation, let's say, of both natural resources but also of human resources and workers. But all of these are not non-binding instrument. So what happens is that a company like Levi's look at these international documents and say, okay, I'm going to try to implement this in my global value chain. But of course, I mean, they don't want to pay as much as they would if they produced really ethically, because ethical production is happening in those countries and not even always, but mainly in those countries that have environmental regulation and worker regulation. No? So, of course, they would produce at home in the US probably if they could not exploit, let's say, the cheap labor of other countries. So what they do is that they draft their own standards, or they subscribe to standard scheme designed by usually NGOs or other organizations that really draft these sustainability standards, and they implement them through the global value chains via contract. But I was saying before, this is like a trap, because in the moment they let's say they draft their own standards, as Levi's does. Levi's has its own terms of engagement that all subcontractors must comply with, and they cover labor law. So they really impose the respect of certain labor standards, protection of workers, in order to be a subcontractor with Levi's. And this is really tricky, because then they implement these terms of engagement in the contract, and when the factory doesn't meet those requirements, they terminate the contract. Usually, okay, there are like a little bit of not this strict, but usually what they always at least can do is to terminate the contract. So the factory, like a factory like the Rana Plaza, on the one hand, I mean, they fear that the contract will be terminated. But at the same time, they want to keep the production very, very cheap. So what they do is that they continue to have cheap production, like cheap, to not protect their workers, basically, or to damage the environment. And and when the auditors come, they hide this so that they can be sure that the contract won't be terminated. So this doesn't really ensure any type of compliance. The only way that this could that this could end, like I would say the easiest way, is that states like Bangladesh introduce some decent law to protect their workers. But you know that, I mean, as a state, the Bangladesh, as I was saying before, they rely on exports. So they will never introduce very strict regulation. And on the other hand, the state like the EU, okay, there is trade law that impedes that we ban these products, but also if you think that the more than a half of the EU GDP comes from consumption, and it's not only services like energy consumption, it's also consumer goods consumption. You see that it's really like there is no interest in properly dealing with this at the state level. So it is purely, I would say, a matter of private law. And this is where the solution, I think, must be found, and also where, well, this is my thesis, where consumers can come in and try to give an incentives to move towards more sustainable practices in production. But yes, as I was saying before, this is really, I would say, hopefully we will witness it, but not tomorrow, unfortunately. So I hope this replied to your question, Mario. Okay. Are there any other questions? Okay, I don't know how long I spoke for. Okay. But okay, if there are no other questions, I would thank the engaged academics for organizing this event, and thank you all for joining me. I hope you will. I made your more like conscious consumers, let's say, hopefully. But yeah, don't go and moralize people around, because that's nonsense, as I hope we understood today. Okay, have a good afternoon, guys. Oh, I have a comment. Okay. Thank you.